This week on Vaticano, we bring you here to the heart of Rome as we do every week, but this week is special. This week we're celebrating our 300th edition of Vaticano. I'm Alan Holdren, EWTN News Rome Bureau Chief. This week we're going to tell you about where we came from, back in 2011 when we started, up until now today, and also telling you about our favorite stories, and the stories that we keep telling on Vaticano. Stick around for more. On March the 25th, the 27 European heads of state and government gathered in Rome to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the signing of the Rome Treaties. This document is considered to be the first major step towards the creation of the European Union. On Friday, March the 24th, on the eve of the anniversary, Pope Francis received these heads of state and government in a private audience at the Vatican. The Holy Father addressed the group after speeches made by the Italian Prime Minister, Paolo Gentiloni, and the President of the European Parliament, Antonio Tajani.
I convey to each of you the affection of the Holy See for your respective countries and for Europe itself, to whose future it is, in God's providence, inseparably linked.
The Vatican City is not a part of the European Union, but due to its geographical location, it's very closely linked to it. Citing the Founding Fathers, Pope Francis recalled that Europe is not a conglomeration of rules to obey or a manual of protocols and procedures to follow. It is a way of life, a way of understanding man, based on his transcendent and inalienable dignity.
At the origin of the idea of Europe, we find the nature and the responsibility of the human person, with his ferment of evangelical fraternity, with his desire for truth and justice, honored by a 1,000-year-old experience. Rome, with its vocation to universality, symbolizes that experience and was thus chosen as the place for the signing of the treaties.
About 72% of Europeans inside the Union profess the Christian faith. In his speech, Pope Francis recalled that at the origin of the European civilization lies Christianity, without which the Western values of dignity, freedom, and justice would be incomprehensible.
Europe finds new hope when man is the center and the heart of her institutions. I am convinced that this entails an attentive and trust-filled readiness to hear the expectations voiced by individuals, society, and the peoples who make up the Union.
Affirming the centrality of man, Pope Francis invited the European leaders to rediscover the spirit of family, in which every member is welcomed and respected.
Whereby each contributes freely to the common home in accordance with his or her own abilities and gifts. It helps to keep in mind that Europe is a family of peoples.
At the conclusion of his speech, Pope Francis compared the 60 years of the European Union with the 60 years of maturity of man. He said that unlike human beings, the European Union does not face an inevitable old age, but the possibility of a new youthfulness.
For my part, I readily assure you of the closeness of the Holy See and the Church to Europe as a whole, to whose growth she has and always will continue to contribute. Invoking upon Europe the Lord's blessings, I ask Him to protect her and grant her peace and progress.
The Treaties of Rome were the founding treaties that established the European Economic Community and the European Atomic Energy Community, and they were signed on March the 25th, 1957. These agreements have led to the longest period of peace in written history in Europe. An interesting fact is that the flag of the European Union has an exquisitely Marian symbolism. The flag, designed by the French Catholic Arsène Heitz, bears 12 stars and Marian colors. In the 12th chapter of the book of Revelation, it's written that a figure of a woman appeared on a blue sky, clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet and a crown of 12 stars upon her head. Whether intentionally or not, the EU flag has Marian symbolism, and the Catholic tradition has venerated the Virgin Mary as the Queen of Europe for at least 700 years. The entire continent was consecrated to Our Lady from the shrine in Gibraltar in the 14th century. Our Lady of Europe, pray for us. On May the 13th, 1917, in Cova de Iria, 3 children were tending their flock of sheep when they witnessed the supernatural apparition of a beautiful young lady. Almost 8 months had passed since the apparition of the angel. The children described the young lady as brighter than the sun, dressed in a white mantle edged with gold and holding a rosary in her hand. She asked the children to devote themselves to the Holy Trinity and to pray the rosary every day in order to bring peace to the world. The little shepherds understood that this woman was the Virgin Mary. She asked them to come to the same place on every 13th day of each month, which they did, thus totaling the number of apparitions to 6 between the months of May and October of the year 1917. The Virgin Mary also entrusted 3 secrets to the children. The first secret was a vision of hell and the suffering of sinners. The second secret was a prediction of the end of the Great War and the beginning of another unless people converted and repented. The Virgin Mary requested the consecration of Russia to her Immaculate Heart. This secret was interpreted as a warning of the spreading of atheistic regimes, and indeed the communist revolution struck Russia on the same year as the apparitions. The third secret was a vision of the death of the Pope and of other religious figures. This latter secret was not disclosed to the public until the year 2000. It refers to the attempted murder of St. John Paul II. Later on, the Pope himself thanked Mary of Fatima for saving his life. The assassination attempt happened in Rome on May the 13th, 1981. JACINTA PEREIRO MARTO from Aljustrel, niece of Francisco and Jacinta, says that her father, João, was several times with his little siblings and cousin Lucia during the Marian apparitions.
O meu pai tinha 2 anos mais que Francisco.
My father was 2 years older than Francisco. My father had the honor of being there when the lady appeared at Valinos. This happened in August. After that, they had all been at the apparition in Villanova de Oren. My father was there but didn't see anything. There were only Francisco, Jacinta, and Lucia, and my father. But he said that, however much he opened his eyes, he couldn't see anything.
Lucia had a special role during the apparitions, as the Virgin spoke only to her.
He would say that he too wanted to see the Virgin, because when this apparition occurred, Jacinta wasn't there, but he was. And Lucia asked him to go get his sister, and he didn't want to, because he wanted to witness the apparition. But in the end, he did go look for Jacinta, and only when Jacinta arrived, then the lady appeared. But João didn't see anything, and they would ask him, "Why didn't you see anything?" And he'd say, "Well, how come Lucia saw, heard, and spoke? And Jacinta saw and heard, but Francisco saw but didn't either hear or speak. Well, I didn't see, didn't hear, and didn't speak either." He was always moved when he'd say this, because he had seen nothing.
Although they were accompanied by friends or siblings, only these 3 children saw the Virgin Mary during the apparitions. And during the last of them, the 3 little shepherds were surrounded by a crowd of 70,000 people who all saw the miracle of the sun.
No, my father, 11 years old at the time, would say, "I didn't go because everybody was saying that if the miracle did not happen, the whole family would die. And so he stayed home. He was afraid. And because he was afraid to die, he wasn't there when the miracle of the sun occurred. Just like he was at the apparition at Valinos, but nothing happened, he wasn't at the miracle of the sun. He was afraid he would die."
Soon after the apparitions, the Virgin Mary took to heaven her 2 smaller shepherds, just as she had promised them. Francisco Marto died at the age of 10 on April the 4th, 1919, and Jacinta died at the age of 9 in February of 1920. Lucia offered her life to the service of God and chose the consecrated life. She continued to report private visions throughout her life. You're watching the 300th episode of Vaticano. This program is made thanks to the producers, editors, and cameramen of the EWTN News Rome Bureau. We find the best stories and bring them to you from the heart of the Church. Welcome back. You're watching Vaticano.
I'm Father KARAM SHAMASHA, and I'm from northern Iraq. My village is called Tasikif, and together with other villages, it is part of the plain of Nineveh, the plain that's also mentioned in the Bible. We come from northern Iraq, and there were more than 120,000 Christians living there. In my village, everyone was Christian. There was no other religion.
Father KARAM SHAMASHA worked as a parish priest for the Diocese of Al-Kosh, serving for some 1,500 Christian families in his own town, until the war started.
Unfortunately, our Christian community has had to endure many hardships and persecutions as well. Since the last ones in 2003, they have burnt down many churches and killed many priests, and many of the faithful as well. All of this since 2003. Our latest ordeal began in June through August 2014. It all started when the extremists came out into the open. Up till then, they had existed as an extreme mentality, but it was never out in the open. It was always clandestine.
When ISIS took over the city of Mosul in 2014, 3 were the options they gave to Christians. The first was to convert to Islam. The second, to pay a special tax named Gisa, which grants them life, but not the possibility to practice their faith. The third option, to be killed.
When they came here in June through August 2014, you must imagine that we didn't have months to ponder our decision. It was a matter of hours. We had to choose, either stick to our faith or renounce it so we could keep our property and our belongings. All of us, may God be praised, all of us, 120,000 Christians, decided to stick to our faith and leave everything else behind. This was for us a test of our faith.
Christians from the occupied zones fled to the Kurdish autonomy, to the Diocese of Erbil and the Diocese of Dahuk. At the checkpoint in the city of Mosul, the Christians ran into armed men who forced them to renounce their faith or give up all their material goods, money, cars, jewelry. Some families saw even their documents being taken away by these men.
That was for us a strong message. They, ISIS, wanted to show us that they had to come to play some sort of game. They had come to destroy, wipe us out in that specific area where we continue to speak the language that Jesus spoke, Aramaic. The very same area that St. Thomas evangelized from 42 to 49 AD, one of the most ancient parts of our church.
After the decision of the Iraqi government to retake the city of Mosul, people started thinking about going back to their houses. Those who returned saw cities destroyed and churches burned down.
What we have witnessed is a message for us, so we may reconsider what the objectives of being Christian should be, what it means to live as a Christian to the fullest, not through empty words, and not as something that can be carried away by the wind.
Like the first Christians, having lost everything, today's Christians of Iraq give their testimony to Jesus, choosing Him above all things, and proving the words of St. Paul, we are treated as deceivers and yet are truthful, as unrecognized and yet acknowledged, as dying and behold, we live, as chastised and yet not put to death. Today, for some people, Islam has come to be a synonym for war and terrorism. Current events have been full of sad examples of massacres and attacks carried out by people who declare themselves to be Muslims. Seeing all of this, how should Catholics react? Is it worth talking about? What should we do, especially when immigrants and refugees are arriving en masse to our towns from Muslim countries? Father Thomas Michel is a Jesuit priest. He has dedicated 40 years of his life to interreligious dialogue with Islam. He says that there is no need for fear, rather for understanding and friendship.
These are not people who are trying to take over somebody else's country. They're trying to survive, and what came across to me more than anything else was their children. They're doing all this for their children. They said, our lives, they're finished. The war has just brought it to an end. But we want something for our children. And I'd say, can't we open our heart? Can't we take a chance that these poor children can have a better life and bring these families over? And when people say, oh, well, maybe there's going to be a terrorist sneak in among them, I think it's a very slim chance. But even so, it's a chance worth taking.
On Thursday, February the 27th, Father Thomas held a lecture on contemporary Islam at the Pontifical Institute for Arabic and Islamic Studies in Rome. This institute was founded by the Society of Missionaries of Africa in 1964. Their study and research center provides the necessary preparation for an informed theological dialogue with Muslims.
I think it's important, people say, for reasons of making peace, but it's more important also for just who we are. We are people of dialogue, aren't we? It's important that I come to know you better and you come to know me better. This is the kind of world that we live in.
The Catholic Church started the dialogue with Muslims after releasing the declaration Nostra Aetate during the Second Vatican Council. The Synod Fathers agreed that the Church should regard Muslims with esteem and urged all Catholics and Muslims to forget the hostilities of the past and to work together in the present for mutual understanding and benefit in the future.
Well, I think the common point between Christianity and Islam is the one God. Muslims and Christians, we both, we say we believe in one God, and Muslims believe in the one God. And so we're both trying to do what this one God wants to do. How can we be enemies with people who are also like us trying to worship the one God?
Father Thomas's lecture on contemporary Islam, called A Christian Encounter with Said Nursi's Risale-e-Nur, was a good example that interreligious dialogue with Islam can help us find the points we have in common and can also be a culturally and spiritually enriching experience.
Nursi said that, who are our enemies? Well, our enemies aren't this group of people or that group of people. Our enemies are ignorance. Our enemies are poverty, disunity. We're not united. He says these are the enemies not only of Muslims but of others, and these are common enemies. We have to fight together. And how do we do it? Well, we use reason. We think things through. We don't see it as the enemy of faith.
Said Nursi was a Turkish Islamic teacher and scholar at the beginning of the 20th century. He emphasized the importance of education and reason in order to build a just and peaceful society.
What's new in the Risale-e-Nur? What was new 100 years ago? He was trying to help Muslims live their faith in a lively way in modern terms. So he's trying to write to modern Muslims and help them to be good Muslim believers and also modern people. He's saying you don't have to live in the past. You don't have to have nostalgia for earlier times.
Father Thomas says that the message of the document Nostra Aetate of the Second Vatican Council is not only about dialogue, The document says that we should esteem Muslims, and esteem doesn't only mean tolerance, it's also to see the good that people have and appreciate them for this good. In a few moments, we'll be back with more on Vaticano. More on Vaticano begins now. On the solemnity of Pentecost, the Catholic Church remembers the outpouring of the Holy Ghost onto Mary and the apostles. In Rome, there's a unique tradition that commemorates this event. At the Church of St. Mary and the Martyrs, also known as the Pantheon, thousands of red rose petals flutter down through the oculus and onto the faithful at the end of the Holy Mass. These red petals symbolize the fire that descends on the heads of the apostles and Mary in the cenacle. Rome, the city known as the open-air museum, never ceases to amaze those who come to visit. This crossroads of civilizations offers visitors a unique experience through the history of mankind, from the classical age down to our own times. And the perfect example of how such different worlds can be combined into a harmonious balance is the Centrale Monte Martini. Located on the Via Ostiense Road, outside the Aurelian walls, this former thermoelectric power plant has now been turned into an exceptional museum. Here, two diametrically opposed realities, classical and industrial archaeology, blend into a well-calibrated play of contrasts. Next to the old machines of the power plant in an almost surreal environment are ancient Roman sculptures and valuable archaeological finds discovered in the area since the end of the 19th century. In the heating room, visitors can also get a closer look at the huge monumental complexes of the Republican era and the imperial period of ancient Rome. And it is here, in this magical context, that the private train of Pope Pius IX has finally found a place. It's a masterpiece of mechanical engineering from the end of the 19th century. The train consists of 3 carriages. The first carriage, known as the balcony, was used as a loggia, so the Pope could bless the crowds that gathered around the train while he was traveling through the Papal States. The second carriage, called the throne room, adjoined the balcony and was connected to it through a wrought iron small platform. This carriage was used as a meeting room and included a small private apartment for the Pope, covered in precious purple drapes and with a small private bathroom. The third and last carriage contained the private chapel of the pontiff. It was the most sumptuous of the 3 carriages, adorned with copper sculptures, frescoes, and paintings. In this, the Pope served Mass during one of his trips. Pius IX was always aware of the importance of the railroad for the economic, social, and political development of the country. And it was indeed during his reign that the railroad network was built which connected Italy to the rest of Europe. In the year 1859, the Pope made his first trip from the station of Porta Maggiore in Rome to the station of Albano, about 15 miles south of Rome, near the papal summer palace of Castel Gandolfo. When the Papal States were incorporated into the rest of Italy in 1870, the Pope King proclaimed himself prisoner of the Vatican, and his private train ended up in a depot of the railroad station of Rome, the capital of the newly formed Kingdom of Italy. After being stored in various places, Pius IX's train can be found today in what might very well be its natural habitat, the Centrale Montemartini, where history, art, and mechanics all combine to create one of the most extraordinary museums of the capital.
Whether you've been with us from the beginning or you're watching for the very first time, we at EWTN's Vaticano want to say thank you for being with us, for supporting us as we bring to you the news and events from here in the Caput Mundi, Rome, Vaticano.